University. For a few, it's the stepping stone for the world of industry. However, for many others, it's the first step down to a life of debt. Students in England now are leaving university with higher debts than almost anywhere else in the world, raising questions on what on earth is going on. On tonight's programme, we will be looking at the financial world of a university student, and in doing this, we will be looking at the problems and effects of the tuition fees, the demanding costs of student accommodation, and get a first-hand look at how students survive on a restricted budget. This is the truth about student life. Today we have come to Falmouth University in Cornwall to talk to both current and former students to see the extent of how finance is changing their lives. During our time here, we spoke to 3 individuals with very contrasting stories of their experiences when it comes to finance. But before we hear from them though, we went out to talk to students to get an overview of student experience.
I've had a lot of money problems, come to mention it. Effectively, I've only just got my student loan yesterday, so for the last week I've been living off a tenner, which is basically mean I've eaten beans on toast for the last week.
Can't afford rent with the lend that I get, which means that like my parents have to shout out a bit, and then I can't afford food because I'm paying everything towards rent.
I'm always having trouble with money, not necessarily because the amount that I have, but because the amount that I spend, which is partly my own fault.
I've got a lot of student loan that I haven't spent, which is always good, but that's probably going to go on accommodation for whenever I find that in a few months. It's been good, I can save up for holidays, which has been good. But also moving from student accommodation back in with my parents has been a bit of a weird contrast.
When you're a fresher, it's like the main thing is like a party atmosphere, so like I spent quite a lot of my student loan on alcohol, booze, just to like try and effectively to make friends.
All my money goes in about 4 weeks of me getting my student loan, and I live off pennies for the rest of it.
Well, I work quite a lot, so I'm ending up getting more money than I'm spending, which is useful. So the main thing I spend it on is petrol and car tax and things, because I live in Truro.
Oh, food all the time. And then I just buy things because I think, oh, that will help me in the future. And then 2 weeks later I'm bored of it already.
We interviewed 2 students to hear what they had to say about their experiences. First year student Callum Lynch, studying television, and 25-year-old Dalton Kamal, who moved to England to study from Australia.
My financial situation right now is probably the best it's been so far while I've been at uni. I'm getting constant regular shifts at work, which is nice because it brings in money so I can go out and treat myself. And my parents give me a bit of money each month for food and just basic surviving.
I initially studied in Australia, but then I decided to come back here. So the first thing that happened was I wasn't allowed student finance, so I had to wait for 3 years. But that took place after I'd been studying for 6 months. So I was literally, my father refused to help me, so I owed £3,000 in accommodation, as well as owing the university £9,000 for first year of study.
With student finance, it was a bit of a challenge because they constantly were asking my mum and my dad for details for like a couple 3-4 years ago, which they found was a struggle to find because of jobs and everything. The
student finance were brutal with it as well. They had me sending through like financial statements to prove that I still had a legal presence in England. I had to send like dentist, GP, bank statements, proof of family address to show that family had been living here, and then they tell me, yeah, you're not getting it regardless. So that first week in Falmouth, I had little food, little money, and parents not really willing to help me.
Fees are going up to $9,250, with interest rates on loans rising to 6.1%, which will push up the average student debt on graduation to over £50,000, which includes maintenance loans. The cost of student housing in Great Britain has increased by almost a quarter in the past 7 years, outpacing inflation and price rises in the private rental market. Students are increasingly relying on their parents working extra hours during term times, and in some cases, taking out payday loans to cover the cost of accommodation. More than half of university students are now forced to pay more than £100 per week for accommodation, as rents have soared in recent years. Tuition fees were introduced in the first term of Tony Blair's Labour government, with students who began their courses in 1998 paying £1,000 a year. Dalton Kamal remembers the announcement of Tony Blair's tuition fee policy.
I was watching sort of Tony Blair sitting in Parliament, looking confident at just the introduction of student fees. So, yeah, whereas the people who make these decisions went to university for next to nothing. So it seems wrong, just so they could add numbers to the GDP, if you will. Okay, it's the way universities are going about it these days. So the way that that accommodations go up every year, like consistently, and the way that they'll charge the student accommodation rent in chunks, so they know oh, your student loan comes in at this point, and that's when we're going to charge you, and they'll charge you for each term via the student loan. So the money goes into their accounts, into their bank accounts, and goes flying out again. Universities are now massively profitable, so they're partly to blame, I suppose, but because they're private owners, so you can't really blame them for making money out of their businesses. But at the same time, the government basically facilitated it for those people to make a lot of money. And it's money that's supposedly given to us, but it's just money we get in debt. We get in debt. That's exactly what we do.
We spoke to Kirsty Dexter, a former Falmouth inductee whose plan to go to university in Falmouth came to an abrupt halt, which resulted in her going to Campbell College. But as you'll see, her story is something that students should never experience.
I just didn't have the money to travel to Falmouth. I just needed to go somewhere local, so unfortunately I made the decision to go to Cornwall College. I felt really disappointed. I felt like I couldn't get where I wanted to go, that money was such an issue that it ended up hindering me where the next 3 years was going to take me and potentially the rest of my life. When the summer holidays started, I was kind of having trouble with my mother and she ended up kicking me out, so I ended up staying in a tent in a local field for about a week. The week I was living in a tent was the first week I started university, and I didn't tell any of my tutors. But I spoke to some of the student support there, and I have to say the student support was completely lacking, and that's another thing as well. I was asking them if there was any emergency support for housing for students. I was 19 at the time, and they said there was no support for me. They said if I could stay with a friend or family members. My only family member kicked me out, and I had no friends at the time. I just started uni, and they said, oh, well, there's nothing you can do then. So I just went out and got a tent from Tesco that day and just slept in a tent, unfortunately, and that was for the first week of uni.
Having spoke to a number of students, what is their number one piece of advice that they would give to aspiring students?
Okay, if you're going to university, if you have to have only your own money, part-time job through summer, or actually work full-time through summer.
Plan your weekly spending ahead, I think. I would always do my shop at the beginning of the week, and then I'd be able to kind of figure out how much I had left over to go out or buy extra things for a course or with friends. So I think as long as you've got food sorted and your accommodation's all good, then as long as you plan it, you'll be alright.
For people wanting to come to uni, I feel like be prepared to have a massive change in life.
Yeah, manage your money, try and get a part-time job if it's available. Try not to work yourself too much as well, because I've had that struggle.
Don't spend things on money. Don't spend money on things you don't need all the time. It's alright to every so often have a bit of a spend, but be smart. Get your food in, budget, get your food in that you need, not what you don't need, and then just food actually. Make sure you've got food all the time, and you'll live. Water also.
After the break, we will be looking at how student accommodation prices are going through the roof.